He never walked into your life like a storm. He arrived quietly, like a pause between thoughts, like a moment you didn't notice until it was already changing you. That's how this kind of love works. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. You feel it in the way silence becomes comfortable around him, in how he listens as if your words matter more than his own. But here's the truth that keeps you awake at night. Love this deep is never simple. There's history behind his eyes, things unsaid, battles fought alone. He wants you, but not at the cost of breaking you or losing himself. So he stands there steady, restrained, conflicted, loving you fully, yet holding back just enough to protect what matters most. And that's the question, isn't it? What do you do when someone loves you deeply but carefully? Quiet, unwavering love is not the kind that announces itself or competes for attention. It does not rely on grand gestures or dramatic confessions to prove its existence. Instead, it lives in consistency, in presence, in the steady rhythm of someone who shows up again and again without needing applause. This kind of love is deeply rooted, often invisible to outsiders, and sometimes even misunderstood by the one receiving it, because it does not follow the loud rules people expect love to obey. It is patient enough to wait, strong enough to endure, and humble enough to remain unnoticed, if that is what the moment requires. This love reveals itself through action rather than language. It is in the way someone remembers how you take your coffee, or how they instinctively adjust their pace to walk beside you. It exists in listening without interrupting, in offering support without trying to fix everything, in being emotionally available without demanding emotional return on command. Quiet love does not rush to be seen. It settles into the background of daily life and becomes dependable, almost structural, like something you lean on without realizing it is holding you upright. Unwavering does not mean blind or naive. It means steady in the face of uncertainty. This kind of love remains even when circumstances shift, when moods change, when the future feels unclear. It is not shaken easily by distance, silence, or temporary misunderstandings. Rather than reacting impulsively, it observes, reflects, and chooses patience. There is a deliberate calmness to it, a refusal to let fear dictate behavior. The person who loves this way understands that emotions rise and fall, but commitment is something deeper than momentary feeling. Often, quiet love is born from emotional maturity or lived experience. It belongs to someone who has already learned that loud love can burn fast and fade quickly. Someone who knows that intensity does not equal depth, and that promises spoken too easily are often broken just as quickly. Because of this awareness, they love carefully, with intention, choosing actions that protect rather than overwhelm. They would rather be consistent than impressive, reliable rather than dramatic. There is also an element of restraint in this love, not because of lack of feeling, but because of respect. Quiet love does not try to possess or control. It allows the other person's space to grow, to struggle, to change. It recognizes that love is not about constant proximity or validation, but about trust. Trust that the bond does not need constant reinforcement through words. Trust that care can exist without constant reassurance. Trust that being present matters more than being loud. To the person receiving it, quiet, unwavering love can feel confusing. It may raise doubts because it does not follow the familiar patterns of passion and urgency. There may be moments of wondering whether the love is strong enough, simply because it does not overwhelm. Yet over time, this love reveals its depth not through peaks, but through endurance. It is the love that remains when excitement fades, when life becomes ordinary, when nothing dramatic is happening. It is the love that does not disappear in silence, but settles comfortably within it. This kind of love often carries a sense of protection, not the kind that shields someone from all pain, but the kind that avoids becoming the source of it. The person who loves quietly is careful with words, aware that once spoken, they cannot be taken back. They choose honesty without cruelty, affection without pressure, commitment without entitlement. Their love does not demand to be prioritized above everything else, but it remains loyal even when it is not at the center. Quiet, unwavering love is also deeply personal. It does not seek validation from others or require recognition. It is satisfied with knowing rather than proving. This can make it lonely at times, because loving this way often means carrying feelings internally without release. Yet there is strength in that solitude, a self-assuredness that does not rely on response to exist. It is love that continues whether it is returned in the same form or not. At its core, this love is a choice made repeatedly. Not once, not impulsively, but every day in small ways. It is choosing kindness when frustration would be easier, choosing patience when anxiety presses, choosing loyalty when convenience tempts. It is not fueled by the need to be needed, but by the desire to care deeply without conditions. It is love that remains steady even when nothing is guaranteed, even when outcomes are uncertain, even when the path forward is unclear. Emotional restraint is often mistaken for emotional absence, but in truth it is the presence of feeling held under careful control. It is not the lack of emotion, but the discipline to manage it rather than let it spill freely. A person who practices emotional restraint feels deeply, sometimes overwhelmingly so, yet chooses not to unload every thought, fear, or desire onto the one they love. This restraint comes from awareness, an understanding that emotions, when released without care, can burden, confuse, or even harm the very connection they are meant to strengthen. This kind of restraint usually develops in someone who has learned that intensity does not always equal intimacy. They have seen how raw emotion, when unfiltered, can become selfish, demanding reassurance, urgency, or control. So they learn to pause, they learn to sit with their feelings, examine them, and decide what deserves expression and what should remain internal. This creates a quiet emotional landscape where love exists without constant declaration, where care is shown without overwhelming the other person. Emotional restraint often looks like silence, but it is not emptiness. It is a man choosing not to speak because he understands the weight words carry. He knows that once emotions are spoken, they can create expectations, obligations, or pressure. So instead of saying everything he feels, he says only what is necessary, what is honest, what will not demand something in return. His silence is not indifference, it is responsibility. This restraint also protects vulnerability. When someone has been hurt before, they learn that exposing every feeling too quickly can leave them unguarded. Emotional restraint becomes a shield, not to shut others out, but to ensure that what is shared is safe, mutual, and earned. It allows love to grow slowly, organically, without forcing depth before trust is ready to support it. The feelings are there, powerful and consuming, but they are kept steady, like fire contained in a hearth, rather than allowed to burn wild. There is also respect embedded in emotional restraint. It recognizes that the person being loved has their own emotional capacity, their own struggles, their own timing. Rather than overwhelming them with intensity, restrained love offers space. It allows the other person to approach freely instead of being pulled in by force. This respect often goes unnoticed because it does not demand recognition, but it creates a sense of safety that is felt even if it is never articulated. Emotionally restrained love often expresses itself through consistency instead of confession, through reliability instead of reassurance, through presence instead of performance. It is shown in staying calm during conflict, in choosing understanding over reaction, in absorbing frustration without turning it into accusation. This does not mean the person feels less. It means they feel enough to know that not every emotion needs immediate release. For the one who practices restraint, this way of loving can be exhausting. Carrying deep emotions internally requires strength and self-control. There are moments when they want to speak freely, to confess everything, to let the weight fall onto someone else's shoulders. But they resist because they value the connection more than the relief of expression. They would rather endure internal turbulence than risk creating emotional chaos for the person they care about. To the one being loved, emotional restraint can feel confusing or distant. They may sense depth without seeing it. They may feel cared for without hearing the words that usually define care. This can create doubt, especially in a world that equates love with constant verbal affirmation. Yet over time, the steadiness of restrained emotion reveals itself as something solid and intentional, something that does not fluctuate wildly with mood or circumstance. Emotional restraint is not repression. Repression denies feeling. Restraint acknowledges it fully, then chooses how and when to express it. It is a conscious act, not a fear-based one. The restrained lover knows exactly what they feel. They simply refuse to let emotion rule behavior. This creates a quiet power, a grounded presence that does not seek validation through emotional display. At its core, emotional restraint in love is about responsibility, taking ownership of one's feelings rather than placing them on someone else to manage. It is about understanding that love is not proven by how much emotion is shown, but by how carefully it is handled, how intentionally it is expressed, and how deeply it is protected, even when it remains unspoken, even when it stays hidden behind calm eyes and measured words, even when the heart is full to the point of breaking, held steady by choice rather than impulse, existing silently but powerfully beneath the surface, waiting not for release, but for the right moment, the right understanding, the right kind of safety to unfold into something shared rather than spilled. Inner conflict is the quiet war that happens when love and fear occupy the same space. It is the tension between wanting something deeply and knowing that wanting alone does not resolve the complexities attached to it. In this state, love is not questioned, but action is. The heart moves forward while the mind holds back, calculating consequences, recalling past wounds, measuring risk against hope. This conflict does not weaken love, it complicates it, giving it weight and gravity that simple affection never carries. This kind of inner conflict often comes from history. Past losses, mistakes, or unfinished chapters linger beneath the surface, shaping how love is approached in the present. A man may feel deeply capable of loving, yet equally aware of how fragile people can be when emotions are mishandled. The memory of having hurt someone before, or having been hurt himself, creates hesitation. Love awakens desire, but memory introduces caution, and the two rarely move in the same direction at the same speed. There is also conflict born from timing. Love does not always arrive when life is stable or clear. It can appear in the middle of transition, uncertainty, or personal rebuilding. When this happens, the heart says yes while circumstances whisper not yet. The individual may feel unprepared, not because love is lacking, but because life itself feels unfinished. This creates a painful contradiction, wanting to step forward while feeling obligated to stand still, wanting to offer everything while knowing that some parts are still being repaired. Inner conflict also emerges from responsibility. Loving someone deeply means acknowledging the impact one's presence can have on another person's life. This awareness can be heavy. The individual begins to question whether entering fully into love will add peace or create burden. They may fear becoming a complication rather than a comfort, a disruption rather than a source of stability. This fear does not come from insecurity alone, but from care. The more someone values another person, the more seriously they take the potential consequences of loving them. There is a constant internal dialogue in this conflict. One voice urges honesty, expression, risk. The other urges patience, silence, protection. Each voice believes it is acting in the best interest of love. One fears loss through inaction, the other fears damage through impulsiveness. Neither is wrong, and that is what makes the conflict so difficult to resolve. Love becomes a balancing act rather than a straightforward pursuit. This internal struggle often results in emotional stillness on the outside. The person may appear calm, distant, or unreadable, while internally they are negotiating with themselves every day. They may replay conversations that never happened, imagine futures that may never unfold, and hold back words that feel both necessary and dangerous. This restraint is not indecision, but over-awareness. They see too many angles, too many possible outcomes, and the weight of that awareness slows movement. Inner conflict also challenges identity. The person must confront who they are versus who they want to be. They may ask themselves whether they are capable of being the partner they believe the other person deserves. This self-questioning can erode confidence, even in the presence of strong emotion. Love exposes gaps between intention and readiness, between desire and capacity, and those gaps become the battlefield where conflict lives. There is also the conflict between control and surrender. Loving deeply requires letting go of certainty, yet inner conflict clings to control as a form of safety. The person may try to manage feelings instead of expressing them, believing that control will prevent pain. But love resists control by nature. This creates a constant push and pull, where the heart wants freedom and the mind insists on caution. Despite its pain, inner conflict is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of depth. Only those who take love seriously experience it this way. Shallow emotion rushes forward without reflection. Deep emotion stops to consider impact. This conflict means love is not being treated as a game or a moment, but as something that can alter lives, futures, and identities. Living with this conflict can be exhausting. It means carrying unanswered questions, unresolved tension, and feelings that have no clear outlet. Yet it also creates a form of quiet integrity. The person refuses to act until their actions align with their values, even if that alignment takes time, even if it costs them immediate closeness, even if it means loving from a distance rather than risking harm through premature action, holding love and restraint in the same breath, walking forward and standing still at once, existing in the unresolved space where devotion and doubt coexist, where the heart remains open but guarded, where love is never absent, only delayed by the weight of knowing too much and caring too deeply. Respect for the other's freedom is a form of love that does not attempt to own, shape, or limit the person it cares for. It begins with the understanding that love is not a transaction or a claim, but a presence offered without force. This kind of respect recognizes that the person being loved existed fully before the relationship and must continue to exist fully within it. Their dreams, fears, choices, and silences are not obstacles to love, but essential parts of who they are. When love respects freedom, it does not confuse closeness with control. It understands that being emotionally connected does not grant authority over another person's decisions or direction. There is no attempt to dictate how the other should feel, what they should prioritize, or how quickly they should move. Instead, there is patience and acceptance that each individual has their own rhythm, their own timing, their own internal compass that cannot be overridden without damage. This respect often manifests as restraint. The person who loves this way resists the urge to demand reassurance, commitment, or clarity before the other is ready. They understand that pressure can turn affection into obligation and connection into confinement. Rather than asking for guarantees, they allow uncertainty to exist. They stay present without insisting on permanence, trusting that what is chosen freely carries more meaning than what is extracted through insistence. Respecting freedom also means accepting change. People evolve, sometimes in unexpected directions, and love that honors freedom does not cling to an outdated version of the person it cares for. It allows growth, even when that growth creates distance or discomfort. This can be painful, because it means acknowledging that love does not freeze someone in place. It means loving without knowing exactly who the person will become and choosing to support that transformation rather than resist it. There is humility in this kind of love. It accepts that one cannot be everything for another person, nor should they try to be. The person who respects freedom does not position themselves as the center of the other's world, but as a part of it. They understand that friendships, ambitions, solitude, and personal struggles all deserve space. Love becomes something that complements life, not something that consumes it. This respect often requires emotional strength. Letting someone be free means risking loss. It means accepting that the other person might choose differently, might walk away, might not return love in the same form. Many people attempt to secure love by limiting freedom, believing that control reduces risk. In truth, control only delays loss while damaging trust. Respecting freedom accepts risk as the cost of authenticity. Love that honors freedom listens more than it speaks. It pays attention to boundaries, even when they are unspoken. It notices when the other person needs space and does not interpret that space as rejection. Instead of filling silence with demands, it allows silence to exist as a neutral, sometimes necessary state. This creates emotional safety because the other person knows they are not required to perform affection to maintain connection. There is also a deep sense of dignity in this approach to love. It treats the other person as an equal, not a possession. Their autonomy is not viewed as a threat, but as something valuable. Decisions are respected even when they are difficult to accept. Disagreement does not become manipulation. Distance does not become guilt. Love remains steady without becoming invasive. Respecting freedom does not mean emotional detachment. The feelings involved can be intense, even consuming. The difference lies in how those feelings are handled. Rather than placing emotional responsibility on the other person, the individual takes ownership of their own emotions. They do not ask the other to change to ease their discomfort. They manage longing without turning it into pressure. This kind of love often goes unnoticed because it does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition for its sacrifices. It simply exists as a quiet allowance, a steady permission to be oneself without fear of consequence. The person being loved may not immediately realize how rare this is because it feels natural, almost invisible like air. But it is precisely this invisibility that makes it powerful. At its core, respect for freedom is an act of trust. Trust that love does not need to trap to survive. Trust that if someone chooses to stay, it will be because they want to, not because they were cornered. Trust that letting go of control does not weaken love, but refines it into something honest, something clean, something that stands without force, without fear, without ownership, allowing two independent lives to move alongside each other without collision, without erasure, without demand, held together not by restriction, but by choice, by willingness, by the quiet understanding that love offered freely is the only love worth keeping. Loneliness within devotion is one of the most difficult emotional paradoxes to live with. It exists when a person is fully committed in feeling, intention, and presence, yet still experiences a quiet sense of isolation. This loneliness does not come from absence of love, but from the imbalance between what is felt internally and what can be shared or received externally. The person loves deeply, often selflessly, but carries much of that love alone, without full expression or reciprocation. This kind of loneliness often grows from restraint. When devotion is combined with emotional control, many feelings remain unspoken. The individual chooses not to burden the other person with the weight of their attachment, their fears, or their longing. They stay supportive, attentive, reliable, while holding back the depth of what they feel. Over time, this creates an internal echo where love exists loudly inside but quietly on the surface. The gap between inner intensity and outward calm becomes the space where loneliness settles. Loneliness within devotion is also tied to presence without possession. The person is there consistently, emotionally available and attentive, yet they do not fully claim the relationship or its direction. They may be close, but not anchored. Connected, but not secure. This partial closeness can be more isolating than distance, because it offers glimpses of intimacy without its reassurance. The person feels involved but undefined, included but uncertain, which deepens the sense of being alone within connection. This loneliness is often misunderstood, even by the one experiencing it. They may question why they feel isolated when they are actively loving someone. The confusion comes from the assumption that love naturally dissolves loneliness. In reality, love can amplify loneliness when it is not shared in equal measure or cannot be fully expressed. Devotion without release, care without certainty, presence without acknowledgement can quietly drain emotional energy. There is also a sense of invisibility in this experience. The person's devotion is rarely questioned or challenged, precisely because it does not demand attention. They become the steady presence, the one who understands, the one who waits. Their reliability becomes expected, almost taken for granted, while their inner struggle remains unseen. This invisibility intensifies loneliness because it creates the feeling of being emotionally essential but personally overlooked. Loneliness within devotion often involves self-silencing. The individual suppresses needs, fears, and desires to maintain harmony. They convince themselves that love means endurance, that patience is proof of sincerity. While there is truth in patience, there is also cost. Each unspoken need becomes another layer of isolation, another reminder that they are carrying more than they are sharing. Over time, this self-erasure can create a hollow space where connection should be mutual. This form of loneliness is not dramatic. It does not explode into conflict or despair. It lingers quietly, surfacing in moments of stillness, late at night, or in the presence of others who seem more openly connected. It is the feeling of having something meaningful to say, but no clear place to say it. Of wanting closeness without wanting to disrupt. Of needing reassurance without wanting to ask for it. There is also a moral struggle embedded in this loneliness. The person may believe that their devotion is a choice they are responsible for, and therefore their loneliness is something they must accept. They may feel guilty for wanting more, viewing desire as weakness or selfishness. This internal conflict deepens isolation because it turns natural emotional needs into private burdens rather than shared conversations. Despite its pain, loneliness within devotion reveals profound depth of character. It shows the capacity to love without immediate reward, to stay present without guarantees, to prioritize another's comfort over one's own relief. This does not make the loneliness disappear, but it gives it meaning. The individual is not empty. They are full, perhaps too full, holding love with no clear place to put it. This kind of loneliness also carries quiet endurance. The person continues to show up, to listen, to care, even when they feel unseen. They find small ways to sustain themselves, moments of meaning that do not rely on external validation. Their devotion becomes a personal value, not a bargaining tool. Yet the cost remains, felt in the quiet spaces where love exists without echo, where presence is constant but intimacy incomplete, where devotion becomes a solitary act rather than a shared experience, where the heart stays open even as it learns to sit with the ache of being emotionally alone while standing beside someone it loves deeply. Acceptance of uncertainty is one of the most demanding emotional disciplines in love. It requires the ability to remain open without guarantees, to care without contracts, and to invest emotionally while knowing that outcomes are never fully controllable. This acceptance does not come naturally to most people, because the human instinct seeks clarity, security, and assurance. Yet in complicated love, certainty is often unavailable, and learning to live without it becomes an act of strength rather than surrender. To accept uncertainty is not to be passive or detached. It is an active choice to stay present in the absence of clear direction. The person understands that love cannot always be defined, labeled, or predicted, and that forcing clarity can sometimes damage what is still forming. Instead of demanding answers, they allow questions to exist. Instead of pushing for resolution, they sit with ambiguity. This requires emotional resilience, because unanswered questions can create anxiety, self-doubt, and vulnerability. Uncertainty often comes from factors beyond emotion. Timing, circumstances, personal growth, and unresolved pasts all contribute to a lack of clear outcome. The individual may know what they feel, yet remain unsure of where those feelings will lead. Accepting this means resisting the urge to rush decisions simply to relieve discomfort. It means understanding that premature certainty can be more harmful than honest ambiguity. This acceptance also involves relinquishing control. Love invites risk, and uncertainty exposes that risk fully. The person cannot guarantee reciprocation, permanence, or future alignment. Instead of attempting to secure love through pressure or manipulation, they allow it to unfold naturally. This can feel frightening because it removes protective illusions. Yet it also preserves authenticity. Love that exists under compulsion may feel stable, but it is fragile at its core. Love that exists freely, even in uncertainty, has integrity. There is humility in accepting uncertainty. It acknowledges that one cannot fully predict or manage another person's choices. It recognizes that emotions evolve, priorities shift, and life intervenes. Rather than clinging to fixed expectations, the person remains adaptable. This flexibility does not mean they lack standards or boundaries, but that they understand the difference between what they can influence and what they must allow. Living with uncertainty requires trust, not only in the other person, but in oneself. Trust that one can endure disappointment if it comes. Trust that one's worth is not defined by outcomes. Trust that love experienced, even if temporary or unresolved, is not wasted. This internal trust becomes a stabilizing force when external certainty is absent. Acceptance of uncertainty also reshapes how hope functions. Hope becomes quieter, less demanding. It is no longer attached to specific results, but to the belief that honesty and presence have value regardless of where they lead. The person stops measuring love solely by its future and begins to value it in the present. This shift allows for deeper engagement without constant fear of loss. This acceptance often coexists with longing. The person may still desire clarity, commitment, or mutual expression, but they no longer allow that desire to dictate behavior. They recognize that uncertainty is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived with. This perspective reduces desperation and replaces it with steadiness. The person remains open without becoming dependent, hopeful without becoming entitled. There is also a moral dimension to accepting uncertainty. It respects the autonomy of the other person, allowing them to move at their own pace without pressure. It avoids turning love into a negotiation where feelings are exchanged for promises. This ethical stance preserves dignity on both sides, even when the future remains undefined. Acceptance of uncertainty changes the relationship one has with fear. Fear no longer dictates action. It is acknowledged, felt, and allowed to exist without control. The person understands that certainty does not eliminate pain, it only postpones it. By accepting uncertainty, they choose honesty over comfort, reality over illusion. This way of loving is not easy. It requires patience, self-awareness, and emotional endurance. There are moments of doubt, loneliness, and fatigue, yet within this acceptance lies a quiet freedom. Without rigid expectations, love breathes. Without forced outcomes, connection remains genuine. The person learns to stand in the present moment, offering care without attachment to reward, staying open without guarantee, finding meaning in the act of loving itself rather than in its resolution, allowing love to exist as it is, incomplete, undefined, and real, trusting that whatever comes will be faced with the same integrity that allowed them to remain present when nothing was certain. In the end, this is not a story about perfect love or easy choices. It is about a man who loves with depth, restraint, and conscience, who understands that real love is not proven by how loudly it is declared, but by how carefully it is carried. His love is steady, patient, and quiet, shaped by awareness, respect, and the willingness to endure complexity rather than escape it. He loves without possession, stays without guarantees, and remains present even when the path forward is unclear. The complication is not a flaw in his love, but the cost of taking love seriously. Because loving this way means accepting uncertainty, honoring freedom, and sometimes standing alone with devotion that has no immediate reward. And yet, within that silence and restraint, there is something rare and enduring, a love that does not rush, does not demand, and does not break easily.